The Academy of Galactic Warfare loomed above the barren landscape of Gallia, its dark spires piercing the stormy skies. The planet's hostile terrain mirrored the training within, a place designed not just to hone soldiers but to forge them into something more, something human and yet, in many ways, less than human. To be a cadet here was to be tested, pushed to limits that few would survive. But survival, as the instructors would say, was never the goal. Perfection was. Sergeant Kendra Albright stood at the base of the Academy's entrance, her breath misting in the cold air. The towering gates loomed ahead, flanked by 2 sentinels, veteran soldiers who had seen more battles than most could imagine. Kendra wasn't afraid, not yet. She had spent her life preparing for this, training in the shadows of loss and determination. Her family had been wiped out during a raid on her homeworld, a burning memory that pushed her forward every day. She would make them proud, or she would die trying. There was no other option. Today marked her first major test. She had survived the Academy's initial trials, basic physical endurance, simulated skirmishes, and grueling mental exercises. But this was different. Today, she would face an instructor who had shattered the spirits of more than one cadet. His name was Instructor Thorne. "Ready?" a voice called from behind her. Kendra turned to find her fellow cadet, Darren, standing a few paces away, his face pale. He had been in the Academy longer than her, and had seen his share of Thorne's brutal training. "No," Kendra said with a half-smile. "But I'll be fine." Darren's eyes flickered nervously. "Don't let him break you. Thorne's methods, they aren't like anything you've faced." Kendra gave him a nod, not fully understanding the gravity of his words. She had faced many trials in her life, but the Academy, this was different. Here, the rules changed. Here, emotions were a weakness, and fear was the enemy. The test began in the central training hall, a vast chamber with floors that seemed to stretch into infinity. Kendra stood in the center of the arena, her boots echoing against the cold steel floor. The air hummed with the buzz of unseen mechanisms, traps, obstacles, and hidden threats that would appear without warning. A figure appeared from the shadows. It was Instructor Thorne, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the dim lighting. His expression was unreadable, his eyes cold as ice. There was no hint of kindness, no flicker of warmth in his presence. His gaze fixed on Kendra with a sharpness that sent a chill down her spine. "You know why you're here, Cadet Albright," he said, his voice a low growl. "Survive. Endure. Prove you have no weakness." Kendra stood tall, her shoulders squared. "I'm ready." Thorne's lips curled into something that might have been a smile, but it lacked any trace of humor. "We'll see." The walls around the arena shifted, revealing a new environment, a dense, alien jungle filled with towering trees and ominous sounds. Kendra's eyes narrowed, scanning the terrain. There was no room for hesitation. No time for fear. "Your objective is simple," Thorne's voice came over the intercom. "Eliminate all targets. Make it to the extraction point alive. And do it without fear." With that, the doors to the jungle slammed shut behind Kendra, locking her inside. The jungle was alive with sounds, strange calls from unseen creatures, the rustling of leaves in the wind. But Kendra focused only on her task. Every step was deliberate, every movement calculated. She had faced simulations before, but this was different. The air here felt heavy with danger. The rustle of the trees could mean a predator or a trap. She reached for her weapon, a sleek plasma rifle that hummed in her hands. It was warm from the energy of countless training simulations, but this was no drill. This was real. Suddenly, the underbrush exploded as a creature leapt out at her. It was fast, a blur of scales and sharp teeth. Her heart raced, but she didn't flinch. Kendra fired. The plasma bolt hit the creature square in the chest, disintegrating it instantly. Her pulse hammered in her ears, but she didn't allow herself the luxury of hesitation. She moved forward, steady and precise. The terrain grew more treacherous as she moved deeper into the jungle. More creatures, predators, ambushes, hidden traps, emerged from the darkness. Each one tested her resolve. each one pushed her closer to the edge. And each time, Kendra fought back, her mind screaming at her to survive, to prove that she was more than just a cadet. But then, the test shifted. The ground beneath her feet cracked open, and Kendra found herself falling, tumbling into a deep ravine. She landed with a grunt, rolling to her feet. Her rifle had been knocked loose in the fall, but she wasn't concerned about it. Her training kicked in as she scanned her surroundings. She had to keep moving. There was no time to dwell on her failure. But then something caught her eye, a flicker in the distance. A figure, standing motionless in the shadows. Kendra's instincts screamed at her to approach cautiously. She crouched low, moving toward the figure with silent precision. As she drew closer, the figure turned slowly to face her. It was another cadet, Darren. His face was a mask of exhaustion, his body bruised and bloodied. But it wasn't his injuries that caught Kendra's attention. It was the look in his eyes, empty, hollow. "Darren?" she asked softly, stepping closer. He didn't respond. He just stared at her, his expression unreadable. "Darren, what happened?" Kendra took a step forward, reaching out to him, but he recoiled. "He told me," Darren whispered, his voice cracked. "He said fear was weakness, that it had to be purged. I couldn't do it." Kendra felt a pang of fear, but she shoved it down. This wasn't about fear. This was about surviving. "I'll get you out of here," she said firmly, her voice steady. But as she turned to help him, the ground beneath them trembled. The jungle around them shifted, the air charged with a new energy. Kendra's heart began to race. She knew something was coming, something big. The roar that followed shattered the stillness. It was too late. The creature was upon them. Kendra's rifle was in her hands before she could think. She fired, but the creature, massive, with glowing eyes and claws like razors, was faster than she had anticipated. The shot missed, and the beast lunged at her. But Kendra didn't hesitate. She dove forward, rolling beneath the creature and slamming her fist into its vulnerable underbelly. It screeched in pain, and Kendra seized the opportunity. With a swift move, she drew a combat knife from her belt and plunged it into the creature's side, twisting it with all her strength. The beast let out one final roar before collapsing. Kendra stood over it, her chest heaving, eyes wild. The adrenaline rushed through her veins, but she didn't let it consume her. Not yet. She turned to Darren, who was now watching her with wide, unblinking eyes. "You're right," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the creature's dying screeches. "Fear, it's not weakness." Kendra offered him a brief, fleeting smile. "No, it's what keeps us alive." But as she turned to leave, she knew this was only the beginning. The real test was just starting. The jungle of Galia was unforgiving, but Kendra had survived. Her pulse was still racing as she made her way through the thick underbrush, but the fight was over. The creature's body lay behind her, a testament to her resolve. Yet there was something gnawing at her, a question that lingered even after the adrenaline faded. Why had Darren failed? The answer, she suspected, was more complicated than simply being weak. The Academy's tests were designed to break cadets, to push them past their limits. But the depths of the psychological toll the Academy demanded were beginning to surface. She needed answers. After the battle, Kendra barely spoke to Darren. She helped him back to the Academy's barracks, where he collapsed on his cot, eyes vacant, as if the lights had gone out inside him. The exhaustion in his face wasn't just physical, it was mental. Thorne's methods were succeeding, but at what cost? Kendra tried to push the thought aside, but her mind kept returning to the same place. Something wasn't right. The next day, during a brief respite between training sessions, Kendra found herself in the barracks common room, trying to clear her head. She was alone, except for a few cadets lost in their own thoughts, all bruised and battered by the grueling tests. As Kendra slouched against the wall, her eyes wandered to the secure door in the corner of the room. A door that was rarely opened, locked with an access code only the instructors knew. She had seen it before, always off limits, always a mystery. Something in Kendra shifted. It was time to look behind the curtain. She rose to her feet, her legs stiff from the previous day's battle, and made her way toward the door. As she approached, her heart hammered in her chest, but her resolve was firmer than ever. This was no longer just about surviving the tests. This was about the truth. She passed a few cadets, who barely glanced up, their minds too consumed by their own struggles. She reached the door, hesitated for a moment, then keyed in a sequence of codes she'd memorized over the weeks. They were subtle hints she'd gathered, patterns in the code she had seen the instructors use. After a tense moment, the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, a dimly lit corridor stretched before her. Her eyes scanned the hallway, but there was no one in sight. The deeper she walked, the colder the air became. She continued, navigating the winding hallways with quiet determination. It wasn't until she reached a large steel door that she stopped. This one, unlike the others, had no security code. Just a thick, reinforced lock. Kendra's mind raced. This was it. She couldn't explain why she felt the pull, but she knew she had to open it. She had to know what was behind that door. With a swift motion, she drew her blade from her belt and pried the lock loose. It took longer than she expected, the sound of metal scraping against metal echoing through the hall. But finally, the lock gave way, and she pushed the door open. Inside, the room was dim and sterile, its walls lined with screens and monitors. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic. Kendra's heart skipped as her eyes landed on the central table, where several bodies were laid out, cadets she recognized from her training class. Their faces were serene, almost peaceful, as if they were sleeping. But it was the monitors next to them that made her blood run cold. The screens displayed brain activity, strange, chaotic spikes in the cadets' neurological patterns. They were being subjected to something far worse than just physical tests. They were being reprogrammed. Kendra's stomach twisted. She wasn't sure whether to run or stay, but something told her that this room was the key to everything. She approached one of the monitors, and her fingers hovered over the console. Her instincts screamed to leave, but her curiosity overpowered her fear. She pressed a button, and the screen shifted, revealing encrypted footage. The footage was grainy, but Kendra could make out the figures, cadets strapped to chairs, their eyes wide open, the fear palpable. Thorn was there, standing over them, his face cold and unyielding as he gave instructions to another officer. Extract the emotional responses. Thorn's voice came through the audio feed. Fear, anger, sadness, erase them completely. We don't need cadets who are burdened by weakness. The video continued, showing the cadets being subjected to strange machines that forced their minds into states of emotional detachment. The footage sent a shiver down her spine. Kendra's breath caught in her throat. This was what had happened to Darren. To others like him. She watched as one cadet, a girl she vaguely recognized from her training sessions, began to scream, her face contorted in agony. But the officers remained unmoved, their hands steady as they manipulated the machines. Finally, the footage cut off abruptly, and a message appeared on the screen. Delete all files. Erase evidence. Kendra's heart pounded. She wasn't supposed to see this. The academy was hiding it. Everything was a lie. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Kendra's eyes darted toward the door, and she quickly unplugged the monitor, her mind racing. She had to leave. But as she moved toward the door, it slid open, and Instructor Thorne stepped inside, his eyes locking onto hers with an expression of cold fury. Well, well, Cadet Albright, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I was wondering when you would come looking for the truth. Kendra's pulse spiked, but she held her ground. What is this? She demanded. What are you doing to them? Thorne's lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. The truth? You think you're ready for it? You think you can handle the cost of victory? I don't care about victory. Kendra spat. I care about the truth. You're turning us into machines, emotionless, heartless soldiers. You're stripping us of what makes us human. Thorne's gaze hardened. You misunderstand, Cadet. The future of humanity depends on our ability to conquer fear. If you cannot control it, you are weak. And weakness has no place in this war. Kendra felt the weight of his words, but they didn't break her. He was wrong. I'm not like the others, she said, her voice steady. I will not be turned into something I'm not. Thorn's smile faded. Then you'll fail. And I'll be there to watch. Kendra didn't wait for him to say anything more. She turned and bolted from the room, her mind racing as she fled back down the corridor. The Academy's dark secret was no longer a mystery, it was a reality. And now, she had a choice to make. The real battle had just begun. Kendra's heart beat relentlessly in her chest as she stood before the gate to the final training arena, her breath shallow and tense. The massive door before her was the gateway to the final test, the ultimate trial that would decide who was worthy of being a true soldier in the galactic war. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken expectations. She had heard the rumors. Cadets had been broken in this test, never to return. And though she had already survived the jungle of Galia and Thorn's brutal trials, this was different. This was no longer just a test of strength. It was a test of soul. She adjusted her tactical vest, feeling the weight of the weapon at her side. Today was not just about surviving the gauntlet ahead. Today, she would face her greatest enemy, fear. She had already seen what it could do to her comrades. Darren, his vacant eyes, his shattered resolve. She couldn't become like him. Not now. Not ever. Cadet Albright. A voice called, sharp and commanding. Kendra turned to see Thorn standing a few paces behind her, his eyes piercing through her like a blade. He was always watching, always calculating. Are you ready for this? He asked, his voice devoid of emotion. She looked back at him, a flicker of defiance in her gaze. I'm ready. Thorn's lip twitched, but the smile never reached his eyes. We'll see. With a final nod, he gestured to the door. Enter. Kendra swallowed hard, pushing past the gate as it opened with a low hum. The air inside the arena was thick with anticipation. The simulation had begun. She could feel the change immediately. The floor beneath her feet felt unstable, shifting like quicksand. Her mind raced as her surroundings shifted, the world around her morphing into an alien landscape. Dark skies hung overhead, casting an eerie glow over a desolate field of jagged rock formations and broken ruins. The ground vibrated, the low hum of machines and mechanisms filling the air. She was in the heart of a war zone, and the stakes were higher than ever before. There was no room for error. No room for fear. Her eyes flicked to the first obstacle. A series of moving turrets stood in the distance, their barrels swiveling, scanning for any sign of movement. Without thinking, Kendra dropped to the ground, crawling toward cover. Her pulse quickened. Each movement had to be calculated, each step precise. As she advanced through the field, Kendra's mind raced, not just about the physical challenge ahead, but about the fight within her. She had faced tests before, crushing exhaustion, grueling simulations, but this was different. This was about her humanity. Could she suppress her emotions enough to win? Would she follow Thorn's orders and become the machine he wanted her to be? In the distance, the sound of gunfire rang out, followed by an explosion that shook the ground beneath her. Kendra gritted her teeth and moved forward undeterred. She could hear the whispers of the past, Darren's voice echoing in her mind. Fear, it's not weakness. She was right. Kendra wasn't going to surrender her fear. She would use it. Use it to fuel her. The next obstacle came faster than she expected. A massive alien creature, its body covered in thick, armored plates, appeared from the shadows, charging toward her with unnatural speed. Kendra barely had time to react as it lunged, its jaws snapping. She dove to the side, rolling into a crouch and firing a rapid burst from her plasma rifle. The shots hit, but the creature's armor absorbed most of the blast. It snarled in fury, circling her, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. Kendra's heart raced, and for a moment, the fear she had fought so hard to suppress bubbled to the surface. She couldn't afford to hesitate, not now. Not ever. With a deep breath, she focused, lining up her shot with precision. Her mind cleared, and in one swift motion she fired. The creature's head exploded in a burst of light, its body crumpling to the ground with a heavy thud. Her chest heaved as she surveyed the battlefield. She had done it. But as the adrenaline of the kill faded, something shifted inside her. The fear had not disappeared, but it had been controlled, channeled, used as a tool. She realized she didn't need to remove it, to bury it beneath cold logic. Fear was the edge she needed to survive. Kendra pressed on, her mind still buzzing with that revelation. The arena shifted again, and she found herself facing the final leg of the test, a labyrinth of narrow corridors filled with hidden dangers. She had no choice but to move forward. The walls seemed to close in around her as she navigated the maze, every corner hiding a potential threat. As she turned a corner, she nearly collided with a cadet, a familiar face from earlier in the trials. It was Lila, a former friend and a fierce competitor in the academy. But something was wrong. Her eyes were wide, vacant, and her body trembled, as if she were in shock. "Kendra," Lila whispered, her voice hollow. "It's too much. I can't do it anymore." Kendra's gut twisted. She reached out, grabbing Lila's shoulder, but the cadet flinched away, her face contorting in a mix of fear and despair. "Lila, you have to keep going. You have to." "No," Lila interrupted, her voice breaking. "I can't. I won't. I don't want to lose myself like they did. I can't keep fighting." Kendra's heart ached as she saw the brokenness in her friend's eyes. She understood all too well. This academy was designed to strip them of their humanity, to turn them into soldiers, into weapons. But at what cost? Was victory worth losing everything that made them who they were? For a moment, Kendra thought about staying, about helping Lila through the test. But the sirens blared, signaling the next phase of the test was beginning. Time was running out. With a heavy heart, Kendra stood up, her voice soft but firm. "You're not alone, Lila. But you have to make the choice. Stay and you'll fail. Fight and you'll survive." Lila didn't respond, but Kendra didn't have time to wait. She turned and continued on her path, leaving Lila behind. It was a hard decision, but it was the only one that made sense. She couldn't save everyone. She had to save herself. Kendra reached the final chamber, the extraction point. But as she stepped forward, she froze. Standing at the exit was Thorn, his face unreadable. "Well done, Cadet Albright," Thorn said, his voice carrying a dark edge. "You've passed the test. But the question remains, will you fight for humanity's future, or will you become a tool of war, devoid of emotion?" Kendra didn't hesitate. She had made her choice. "I will fight, on my terms." Thorn's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. The doors opened before her, the path forward clear. But as Kendra stepped into the unknown, she realized that this was not the end of her journey. It was only the beginning. Kendra's heart raced as she stepped through the final door, her eyes darting around the darkened command center. The sterile, lifeless walls glowed faintly with the light of countless monitors and data terminals. But none of the machines held her attention. All she could focus on was the man standing at the far end of the room, Instructor Thorn. His expression was unreadable, but Kendra saw the faintest flicker of something in his eyes. Was it disappointment? Anger? Or perhaps something worse, fear? "You made it." Thorn's voice rang out, smooth and cold. "You passed the final test. But there's one last thing I need to show you." Kendra's jaw tightened. She had come this far. Nothing was going to stop her now. "I already know what you've been doing," she said, her voice steady. "I've seen the footage. The experiments. The cadets you've broken. You're turning us into monsters. And I'm done being part of your game." Thorn's lips curled into a smile, but it was the kind of smile that made Kendra's skin crawl. "You're right, Cadet. You've seen the truth, but you haven't seen everything." He stepped aside, gesturing to a large, black console mounted on the wall behind him. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of images, faces of cadets she had trained alongside, all marked with a red X across their faces. What is this? Kendra demanded, her voice shaking now. What are you doing to them? Thorne's eyes darkened as he walked over to the console, tapping a few keys. The screen shifted, showing more footage of her. Kendra's stomach lurched. The images were blurry at first, but as they cleared, she saw herself, lying unconscious on a table, wires and tubes connected to her body. No, she whispered, stepping forward, her hand reaching out toward the screen. This isn't real. This can't be. Thorne's voice cut through her thoughts. Oh, but it is. You see, Kendra, you've been more than just a cadet. You've been part of an experiment all along. He paused for a moment, watching her face. You're special. You're the first one to pass through the Academy's final test without becoming a soulless weapon. Kendra's pulse quickened as the realization hit her. You've been manipulating us. All of us. Thorne nodded slowly, his expression unchanged. Fear is the enemy, cadet. But it's also the key. You were meant to be the one who could control it. The one who could become the perfect soldier. But you didn't understand the price of that power. Kendra stepped back, trying to process the revelation. The truth was more horrifying than she could have imagined. The Academy wasn't just training soldiers. They were trying to create something more, something human, and yet, something inhuman. The price was the very essence of their humanity. You think I'm just a tool for your war, Kendra said, her voice rising. You think I'm just a weapon to be used, but I'm not. I'm more than that. Thorne's face tightened. You don't understand. It's not about you. It's about humanity's survival. You'll thank me when the war is won. Kendra's eyes narrowed, her fists clenched at her sides. No. You've twisted everything. You've made us weak. You've turned us into experiments. We are human, not machines. For the first time, Thorne's composure faltered. You're wrong, he growled, his eyes narrowing. The war has no room for weakness. Fear makes us weak. The room pulsed with a quiet hum, and Kendra realized, with sickening clarity, that she had to stop him. If she didn't, more cadets would suffer, more lives would be lost in Thorne's twisted quest for the ultimate soldier. Kendra took a step toward the console, her eyes locked on Thorne. You're the one who's weak. You're afraid of what humanity could become without fear. But I'm not afraid anymore. Without thinking, she lunged for the console, slamming her hand against the control panel. Thorne's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist, but she twisted free, her mind screaming to finish what she had started. She had to stop the experiment, stop the machines, stop the Academy from creating any more monsters. The console beeped as Kendra disabled the primary lock. Screens flickered. Lights dimmed. Thorne's face turned a sickly shade of pale as the data began to unravel. Everything he had built, all his manipulations, falling apart. No! Thorne shouted, his voice filled with rage. He surged forward, but Kendra was ready. She stepped aside, her foot catching his leg, sending him crashing to the ground. You've lost, Thorne, Kendra said, standing over him, her voice steady. The truth will come out, and you won't be able to hide from it. Not anymore. For a long moment, Thorne said nothing, his chest heaving as he stared up at her. Kendra could see the fury in his eyes, but there was something else, fear. You think you've won? Thorne spat, his voice dripping with venom. You've only just begun to understand what this means. The war won't end because you exposed me. It will never end. We'll always need soldiers. And you. He pointed at her, a twisted smile creeping onto his face. You'll be just another casualty. Like the rest. Kendra's pulse raced, but her grip remained steady. Not anymore. With a final motion, she disabled the final program, erasing every file, every experiment, and every trace of Thorne's manipulation. The Academy's corrupt practices were no longer a secret. The evidence was gone, and Kendra was free. The doors to the command center slid open with a hiss. Kendra didn't need to look. She could hear the footsteps, the arrival of security forces, but this time, she wasn't afraid. This time, she was in control. We're not the enemy, she said quietly, turning to face the approaching officers. Thorn is. The officers hesitated, their weapons still raised. But as they saw the destruction on the screens and the quiet defiance in Kendra's eyes, they lowered their weapons. They knew the truth too. It wasn't just Thorn anymore, it was the entire system. Kendra stepped forward, her head held high. She had broken the cycle. And the fight for humanity's soul was just beginning.